Dear friends, it is an immense honor for me to open our next conversation, Truth, Justice, and the Power of Journalism. Marija Šajkaš, Columbia Global Freedom of Expression member and communications specialist, will sit down with prominent journalists, activists, and authors, Elena Kostyuchenko and Paul Caruana Galizia. Elena Kostyuchenko had been a special correspondent for Novaya Gazeta, Russia's last major independent newspaper, for 17 years, till the newspaper was shut down by the Russian authorities in March 2022. She reported on conflict, crime, and human rights, and was among the first to prove the presence of Russian troops in eastern Ukraine. She covered the Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine from its second day. She now collaborates with the independent Russian exiled media Meduza. Her work was acknowledged with multiple awards, including the European Press Prize, the Gerd Bucerius Award Free Press of Eastern Europe, and the Paul Chlebnikov Prize. Paul Caruana Galizia became a journalist after his mother, Maltese investigative journalist Daphne Caruana Galizia, was assassinated. Since then, Paul has won an Oral Prize Special Award, a British Journalism Award, and other honors for his reporting. Together with his brothers, he has received the Magnitsky Human Rights Award and an Anderson Lucas Norman Award for campaigning to achieve justice for Daphne. Marija Šajkaš is a writer, media and communications specialist, and founder of For Better Media. Her most recent appearances include work for Columbia Global Freedom of Expression, Reporters Without Borders, and the American Bar Association. Before that, Marija was the head of development and operations for Media Diversity Institute USA, a press officer for the International Committee of the Red Cross, and a deputy editor-in-chief of the Bridges magazine, the first media outlet distributed in post-war Bosnia, produced by the United Nations SFOR forces. Please join me in welcoming Elena, Paul, and Marija to the stage.
Thank you, Nastya. Welcome everybody to Truth, Justice, and Power of Journalism. It will be about an hour-long conversation with Elena and Paul. We will leave some time for your questions. If you like our conversation, you can purchase their books at the back, and I encourage you to do so. Both books are phenomenal. And yes, Elena Kostyuchenko, Russian currently living in exile, the author of I Love Russia, Reporting from the Lost Country, a collection of her reporting in the last 15 years, combined with more personal narratives. And then Paul, welcome. Paul Caruana Galizia, A Death in Malta, An Assassination, A Family Quest of Justice. Focuses on his mother, Daphne Caruana Galizia, who was one of the best-known investigative journalists, a founder of investigative journalism in Malta, I would say, and she was assassinated because of her investigations in the highest echelon of Maltese government and businesses. Both books can be understood as really in-depth research political landscapes of Russia and Malta. In both books, our authors are seeking the truth, but possibly more interestingly, both books are deeply emotional. When Elena writes about growing up in Russia and the ordinary lives of Russian people, she's very nuanced and emotional. Paul's book can be also understood as deep love of three sons towards their mother. By all accounts, Daphne Caruana Galizia was an exceptional woman. From Paul's book, we learned that she was the first journalist of any gender in Malta to sign her columns. The act so extraordinarily that people ask her, does your husband write it for you? After newspapers yield to pressure to stop publishing her investigations, she became an early adopter of media technology, setting up a blog called Running Commentary. Her blog had a greater readership than all the Maltese newspaper combined. Finally, she was, as I said, a pioneer of investigative journalism and to extend the civil society in Malta. So, Paul, in the book you say, our friends' parents often ask us, why is your mother still writing? It is so dangerous for you boys, she should stop. She herself wrote that the greatest enemy of freedom of expression is fear. Tell us more about her, and especially what was the force behind her truth-seeking journalism that transcended fear?
So as you said, she was the first person in the country to start writing a political column under their own byline. And that was in 1990. And so up to that point, there was still a total culture of fear and silence. That came out of this period, really my mother's formative years in the 70s and 80s in Malta. So Malta decolonized in 1964, the year she was born. And the country, instead of going on this path it had promised itself of being free and open, in the 70s started closing off from the world and started aligning itself, rather than with the West, with, say, China, North Korea, Libya, the Soviet Union. And so it became a very closed place. And for a child, it meant, for example, not being able to buy the comics you wanted, the clothes you wanted, and so on. But because we were a colony, this outside world was brought to her. So we still got British publications. And she began asking why are their lives so different to ours? Why don't we have those things? Why can't we say these things? And that's really what took her into journalism. And she made the decision very early on that if she is going to be a journalist, then it has to be with purpose, in the sense there's no point doing it if you feel you can't write this or that, use your name. That it would have to be the whole thing.
Thank you. And Elena, for many years you were a reporter of Novaya Gazeta, a newspaper that you call your other family. You write that 6 of your colleagues were murdered in connection to their work, and I fear that the number might be even higher today. When you were told by your editor that you were in danger and may be assassinated, your first thoughts were nevertheless, how do I return and continue reporting? Or, as we learned from your book, when a neighbor, Marija Markovna, tells your mother, stop your daughter, she doesn't understand what it means to be an enemy of the state, you write that you really did not at that time. So the same question goes to you. What drives reporting in defiance of all odds and fear? Easy one.
I don't know. I mean, for me, it's a personal choice, and I just basically enjoy the process. I mean, it's wonderful to travel and see people and discover new things and describe the reality for the readers. And unfortunately, in my country, this work now is a crime and consequences might be deadly. But does it change the substance of our profession? It does not. The price is high, but the substance is all the same. We are not the only people who, people who has a dangerous profession. There are many other dangerous professions. But the key issue, I believe, here is why people chose repressions over the letting us speak. And I believe fear also drives them. They feel like they prevent something dangerous. It might be danger for them or danger for future generations, but then they chose repressions. And our choice remains the same. We just do what we like and do what we believe into. And there is nothing what we can add to that, I believe.
Thank you. Paul, at the time of Daphne's assassination, almost 50 libel cases were pending in courts against your mother. And in your book, she says she aspired to true freedom of expression in a place that never allowed or even wanted it. And you touched upon that a little bit. Fast forward to this year, and now we have anti-SLAPP direction, also known as Daphne's Law. I believe that many lawyers in this room would like to hear more about it. Both, of course, how it was when you faced with so many, cases after she died, and then also, what's the situation today?
Of course. Well, since there are lawyers in the room, so she was facing 48 libel suits. 5 of those were criminal libel. We still had criminal libel in Malta. It was repealed after she was killed. It was only ever really used against her. So those 5 cases dropped. But the 43 other cases, the civil libel suits, continued because under Maltese libel law, a claimant can continue seeking damages against the person's estate, which is what those claimants did. Meaning my father, my 2 brothers and I, as her heirs, had to take on those cases ourselves. So we became the respondents in court. That presents issues. For example, my mother isn't there to give evidence. My mother's sources may not want to speak to us. They had a relationship with her. Another thing about Maltese libel law, I should say, is it's like English libel law. So the burden of evidence is on the respondent, so that you make a claim, but it's you, the respondent, who has to go to court and start giving evidence, which for a journalist in general is a horrible situation to be in, obviously. In our case, again, we didn't have access to the author of the pieces because she had been murdered. Her sources were less likely to talk to us because she had been murdered, and they were quite scared. And it just became this very difficult thing where we were called to court. We could only tell the court what my mother had told us. In the end, though, we lost one case, with damages of 400 euros. And we fought the number down to 3, I think. So to come to the anti-SLAPP directive, that was born out of this experience that there was in Malta and many other EU member states no anti-SLAPP measure like there is in many states here. So that allowed for a situation in Malta where someone could be sued over and over again, but you would have to wait until the end of the proceedings for the court to say, you know what, that was a slap, which seemed to us not a great way of doing things. So it was Matthew, my brother, who campaigned really intensively for years at the European Union level to get them to come up with this directive, which passed in February of this year, which is the first kind of supranational anti-SLAPP measure, which will now start being incorporated into member state law.
Thank you. So, Elena, in your book you write about how you bought your mom a computer and your sister bought her a TV. And then, after some time, you had the following dialogue with your mom about Crimea. Yes, and I want to say that all of us who are displaced, coming from countries such as former Yugoslavia and others, we all had the same conversations with our parents at some point. So you say, Mama would call me and say, thank God you are there, God protect you. From what? Do you know how many Nazis they have out there? They have hung us only because we are Russian. That's nonsense, Mama. They hate everything Russian now. They prefer Europe. They consider us enemies. What? Don't you know anything? What do you know? I watch TV, Mama says. And I read my colleagues reporting. They are Russians and nobody hanged them. Because your newspaper is anti-Russian. That must be why. So I think this short excerpt is illustration of the state propaganda, the force of the propaganda. So in very few words, what is the state of freedom of expression today in Russia? Though you did mention that being a journalist is a crime, that for which you can be killed.
Well, the freedom of expression is denied in modern Russia. We have forbidden words like war, occupation, aggression. Contextually, it also can be rape, murder. More than 1 million internet pages, including Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, are blocked. And all of independent media are blocked as well. We have new articles in our criminal and administrative code. One of them called, we called it just fake news, but it's like deliberately false information spreading about the war, about the usage of Russian armed forces. And basically it's every information which is controversy with the information from Ministry of Defense. And spreading this information, it's up to 15 years in prison, and it can be a group crime. So basically, when I reported from Ukraine and my newspaper chose to publish my reporting, they were all in danger because, like, we all can go to jail. Not just me, but, for example, the accountant who transferred me money for his trip and like editors. And another one article is called
you can say in Russian.
Yeah, well, like a discreditation of the usage of la 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 la. And it's basically can be any emotional response which is not positive about the war. And first it's fine, but if you stop continuing not loving war, it's up to 5 years in prison. And every day some of Russian citizens goes to jail and prison for protesting the war or for just discussing it. So we are in very, very low state, but it didn't just started from the war. It started way before. And it was a long, long, long way to that.
Thank you. So, Elena, in the acknowledgements you say, I wrote this book having lost my home and my country. From your essay published in magazine N+1 and then later redistributed and translated and carried by various magazines in English, we learned that the last year you were likely poisoned by the Russian state. During your life in exile, you wrote this wonderful book. What is next for you?
Well, my health improved, so I'm back into the field. I just recently traveled to Ukraine and I'm about to write my reporting. I want to write a second book, which is also about a big crime, but another one. And I want to be a mother, and this is my life plan. And I just got married, so
congratulations!
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, so there are some nice things in your like immediate future. We are happy to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, I believe it's very important not let those people take life from you, not let them to be on your mind constantly, so you can move on, you can work, you can do important things. And, well, I cannot say I'm such a smart and optimistic person. I got it all by myself. My wife helping me to realize it. And it's very important to have someone on your side when you're exiled. So I'm very lucky to have her.
Thank you. Paul, in your acknowledgements, you say that all proceedings from this book and your projects that grow out of it will go towards the work of Daphne Caruana Galizia Foundation. After passing the Daphne's Law, what is next of your agenda?
So the foundation, which my eldest brother Matthew runs, is primarily focused on the criminal proceedings in her case. So there are two really important sets of proceedings, the first being against the man accused of commissioning her murder, and then another against 3 men who supplied the bomb used to kill her. But more broadly, the foundation has already started supporting investigative journalism in Malta, which has always been difficult. After my mother's murder became obviously harder. And so Matthew's kind of brought different newspapers in Malta to collaborate over the same stories. And they've done already some really important corruption reporting.
So these were forbidden stories?
No, Forbidden Stories was the group of journalists who formed really immediately after she was killed and carried on her stories. So we were put in a position of having all her material, but of course we couldn't do anything with it ourselves. It had to be handled independently of us. And so we started speaking first to The Guardian, then to Reuters, and then a broader group backed by Forbidden Stories formed around them. In the end, it turned out to be one of the most important things we did, because those journalists broke really important stories. The first round of reporting revealed really serious, really grand corruption around the power station deal, which my mother had been investigating. The second round of reporting they did revealed the ownership of a shell company, and that owner turned out to be the man who commissioned the murder.
Yeah, and then Forbidden Stories were a great example of, journalists across the countries in solidarity working together.
They are really astonishing group of journalists. They're some of the best in the world, in my opinion. And they were totally dedicated to the stories, took on enormous risk. And they are a great example of collaboration and the importance of that public interest journalism.
And then just briefly, what is next for you?
Oh, I got married and had a child. I wish I had left it a bit longer, but it was from the same place. I remember telling myself, you can't let it take over completely, or you can't let the ugliness take over completely. In the end, that's also a statement of resistance, but you have to carve out these places. I'm different to Elena in that I became a journalist after my mother was killed. And I slightly begrudge the time I wasn't a journalist. I'm just happy to continue doing that.
Before we open up the floor for questions, Elena, do you maybe have a question for Matthew?
Paul, Matthew's
Paul, sorry, yes, Matthew.
Happens a lot.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to ask you, how was it to work on this book, and how were you able to recreate the life and path of the person who's gone?
The funny thing is this, I thought the hard part would be the murder, but in the end, that was so well documented through, investigative reports, court transcripts, and so on. It just became a straightforward reporting job. Writing about her early life was really hard, and also the most moving. So I tracked down people she was at school with, her first love. That was hard and awkward, because obviously you're calling up people as the son of a murdered person rather than a journalist. But it took a lot. In the end, that took most effort, most time.
And Paul, I know that you read Elena's story, and you actually told me in email that you're a fan of her. So do you have a question for her?
Yes. On the scene you mentioned about your mother and the TV, what is it like when you speak to her now?
Well, it's getting better, but we talk every day. And it's working. I mean, now she doesn't believe that this war can be justified. But she still believes Putin in many other ways. And I believe the really key thing for us to move on was basically when I started to listen to her, not just waiting time when I can give my argument, shiny argument, present around her, but actually listen to her, and it was hard. Sometimes I was just screaming on her, stop telling me this TV bullshit. And she's like, hey, this is not TV, you speak with your mother. And it's hard for her to listen to me too. But because we love each other and we remember that we are the most important people for each other, this love creates kind of bridge so we can keep trying to meet each other in the middle. Yeah, I mean, conversation is the key, but I know that many people are not so privileged as I am in that matter. Many families in Russia got departed, and people stopped listening to each other, stopped talking to each other. That's a shame.
Thank you. And now we are opening the panel for questions. And we hope that we have some. If not, I can continue. Yes, please.
My name is Anastasia. I work for Columbia Global Freedom of Expression, and I study nonfiction writing at Columbia University. I come from Russia. I come from a small place in the Urals. And my question is for Elena. Elena, I think your reporting that's in the book, the reporting on ordinary people, marginalized people, on the faraway regions is exemplary. And my question to you is, how do we, journalists, writers, continue doing that from exile?
It's a tough question. It's like the main question all of us have now. I mean, investigative people, they keep investigating, they do a scene and all the stuff. But for reporters who can basically describe only what we see and hear, that's an issue. So for me, I chose that I would keep being a reporter, not a phone reporter, because we have a new profession called phone reporters. They call to the people into Russia and ask them, what do we see, what do we hear, what is their experience, and then try to combine their words into something. So I decided that I don't want to do that, but I want to be in the field. And I decided that I will be in the places where Russia affects other people and other countries, like Ukraine, but not only Ukraine, there are many other places like that. All media working in exile are collaborating with people inside of Russia, with very young reporters. most of them are really young, I say 18, 19, 20 years old, who step into the profession into the darkest time and who are basically describing what we see and hear and do what we did before. We're helping them to learn more about profession, but basically they're helping us so much way more, and they're true heroes.
Thank you. Is there another question?
Hi, Doreen Weissenhaus, a professor at Northwestern University. Thank you both for incredibly wonderful stories and detailing about your experiences, but as a law professor, I would like to direct this question to Paul. So you had mentioned that there were a number of cases settled and there were still 40-some cases still ongoing. What is the status of those cases? And then also, what other type of legal reform can be done? We mentioned, obviously, the anti-SLAPP directive, but is there anything more that the EU or other countries can do?
So the status of the remaining cases is that the proceedings are ongoing, and there's one case brought by the former Prime Minister who is the one who keeps asking for adjournment. In other cases, we're put in a position where my father submits an affidavit saying, my wife told me this, and my brother will do the same, and the court considers them. On reform, I mean, this comes from an obvious place of self-interest, but the idea that you can continue suing people after they're dead is an obvious place to start. The anti-SLAPP directive is another. So the thing about Malta is damages in libel suits are capped at 11,400 and something euros, so they're not all that high. But then legal costs are very low, unlike in England. So the way people do it is they just file loads of cases. And though the respondent has to pay court fees to file a response, meaning you're already hit, before the court even starts hearing your case. So there was one man who sued my mother 19 times over the same story. So of that 43, 19 were his. He's dropped them all, by the way. But simply to respond to his 19 suits, she had to pay court fees totaling 7,000 euros. So that's before the lawyers, before anything. So I think that would be covered by the anti-SLAPP directive, right? You can't, those 19 suits were over the same story, right? That clearly shouldn't happen. And I think, though, the bigger change that needs to happen in Malta is this idea that that people resort to libel law all the time for even these really kind of small, what they believe are small claims against them. I think that culture has created a situation where people think a story is only true if a Maltese court decides it is. You know what I mean? That's the sort of baseline assumption. And that is starting to happen, I think.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Juan Manuel from Columbia Global Freedom of Expression. And something I wanted to know, I mean, journalism seems to be an uphill battle all the time. We're constantly underfunded, we're under a myriad of different threats from different agents and stakeholders in many different fields. And I have two questions for both of you. The first is, what motivates you to keep on going? What do you find in exercising this profession that it is so important that even when facing threats against your own integrity, your life, you wake up every morning and say, okay, I want to keep doing this. I need to keep doing this. And my second question is, what would you say to lawyers, to stakeholders, to policymakers? What would you want them to understand about the exercise of journalism? If you could distill a message for such a group, what would that message be for them? Thank you.
Elena, do you mind starting off?
Sure. I guess what keeps me going is curiosity, and also I'm a very stubborn person. I don't like to be interrupted. It's actually a nice way to spend your life. You discover new things all the time, and you are very attached to the reality. And then you got detached from the reality, profession punishes you. So you all very real, it's good. I don't believe that we are the fourth power, I'm sorry, at least not in Russia. But if I believe in some higher purpose of journalism where just deliver information by request, it would be creating invisible connections between people, make people less strangers to each other. And I believe those invisible connections, then people care about each other, though we never saw each other. Actually, it's something what keeps the world together, not the politicians, not the UN, not the map, not borders on the map, but these connections between people's hearts. And what I wish to say to all those important people who define our lives so much, we're just describing the reality. We like this, and here my English goes away, when car is driving, tires touches the ground, and there is this special force that makes them touch to the ground. So we have this special force. We make people get attached to the reality. If car doesn't touch the ground, car goes away, everybody dies. Our work, though it doesn't feel so in the moment, is beneficial for every country, every state, every regime. It's important that we would keep spending our life this way and keep telling people what's happening around us. And no purpose of preventing immediate danger can be used as an excuse for repressions. It's how we lost our country, so please don't lose yours.
Thank you. Yeah, this was wonderful. And now, Paul, no pressure at all, but something about life and...
Something about...
and journalism as a higher power, yeah. And then address the lawyers.
Yeah. I think this, in the end, it was journalism that changed Malta. It was journalism that exposed Malta's trajectory to this mafia state, and it was journalism that brought it back. And that's in some ways a horrible thing for me to think and say because my mother was killed, but there was complete institutional failure, and that she was killed rather than a judge, an MP, a magistrate, tells you something, I think. And it is an uphill struggle in most places, but I don't know, it's also a sort of golden age of journalism, because some of the stories people are working on, the corruption they're revealing is extraordinary. and it's the work of journalists. That is the case in Malta, certainly. It's the case in the UK, where I live now. And on why people do it, like Elena said at the start, it's mostly fun. Reporting can be really, really fun. It feels like a privilege. I spent most of my 20s doing really dull jobs, so I definitely feel like I am privileged to go out, speak to people, travel, to write. It feels extraordinary to me that I can make a living out of doing those things. On the lawyers, look, a lot of our campaign has relied on exceptionally good lawyers in human rights law, criminal law. So Malta's first public inquiry is thanks to two really brilliant lawyers, one in London, one in Malta, Keelan and Therese, who feature in the book. And my father happens to be a lawyer. And so many of them do really great work. So many of them make themselves tools for really problematic people and take their obligations to their clients more seriously than to the law and what is true. And that's certainly true in a lot of the lawyers we've had to deal with. And I think, like, it's a question for whichever bodies set their professional standards. It's become a big debate in England, and we need that in Malta for sure.
Thank you. And if we don't have any more questions, we do. Yes, please.
Hi, this is a question for Paul. I've heard it said several times that the most uncomfortable thing is to have a writer in the family. And I found it particularly poignant in this case because I think rather than to be an uncomfortable truth, in this circumstance, it was something crucial. It has been something crucial to like access to justice. And yet writing about one's family is very difficult. So I was wondering, how did you approach that closeness with your subject? Earlier you were discussing about how it felt so weird to call exes from a son, but also a journalist point of view. So yeah, I was just wondering about how that experience was. Thank you.
It was difficult is the summary answer. And we were a very private family, and you know, especially my maternal grandparents, who are both still alive. And I started by interviewing my maternal grandmother a lot, and we spoke for days, many hours, for many days. And then it's as though at a point she realized what it was all for, and she called me up and she said, "Paul, you know this book you're writing? There can't be any personal information about your mother in it." I thought, hang on. And it was very awkward, the whole thing, because I had to ask my father what being married to her was like. And initially he didn't feel like telling me, of course, and it took him a while to warm up to it. And I don't know, you just have to break through it, you know, and convince them that you really do want to hear the bad bits as well. Then I made this mistake of sharing a very early draft with my father and brothers. And they reacted in really characteristic fashion. So Matthew, my eldest brother, just didn't read it. Andrew, my middle brother, said, "I like it, but I'm going to send you some suggested scenes." And then I got an email with like 10 suggested scenes. And I read them and I thought, hang on, they all star him. and then my father told me, Paul, it's good, but do we really need so much on the first boyfriend? And then I shared no other drafts with them after that.
So we heard a lot about Matthew's writing process. I think it's only fair to hear a little bit for the end about Elena's writing process, if you don't mind sharing.
Sure. Well, I was thinking about this book for like 7 years before I wrote it. So my writing process is endless procrastination. The personal parts of this book was the hardest for me because honestly I became a journalist because I never wanted to look at myself, at my own life. And here I had to, because I cannot describe how my country ended up being fascist country, excluding my story from that, just pointing fingers at our people and look how we lived, look what the wrong choices we did. Like, no, it's not an option. So I pointed finger on me and looked at myself, and I didn't like what I saw, but I had to write it down, so I did. And there is a saying that behind every book there is an invisible woman. So yeah, behind my book there is an invisible woman, my wife, Elena Kostyuchenko. I started to write this book after I left Ukraine the first time, after the full-scale invasion. And I mean, I had PTSD, and it was really challenging for me to lose my country and to won't be able to come back home. And I was basically falling apart. And my wife said, you do your writing, I will do the rest. And for months she did the rest. She cooked, she cleaned, she made sure that I sleep, that I eat, that I drink. She read my first drafts and told me then it's working, then it's not. One draft she made me rewrite 4 times. I will remember it forever. But yes, without her, my book wouldn't happen. And that's like how I do it, like procrastinating, crying, writing, and using other people's support.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Big thanks to all invisible women behind our books, your mom, your partner. And I am cutting it short on purpose because I would like you all to have opportunity to talk to authors a little bit. And also if you want their books, they're over there to purchase and they can sign them for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.